Hello YouTube. This video is about this Driveshaft loop and once again building something without reading the rules first. I'm looking at section 4A for Super Pro, Pro and Sportsman under Driveline, and it says Driveshaft loop required on all cars running 1399 or quicker and utilizing slicks, except for vehicles running 11.49 seconds or slower and equipped with street tires. See General Regulations 2.4. Under General Regulations 2.4, it says for all cars with drive shafts that contain universal joints, for all full body and open body cars running between 7.5 and 1399 in place of a cross member located behind but within 6 inches of the center line of the front universal joint, a front drive shaft loop is required on all cars except vehicles running 11.49 seconds and slower equipped with street tires. Further down in the regulations, they have a drive shaft loop definition, and it reads 360 degrees of enclosure, 1/4 inch minimum thickness and 2 inches wide, or 7/8 inches by 0.064 inch welded steel tubing, securely mounted to the frame or frame structure where available. There is a diagram in the book that depicts a loop that's solid all the way around the drive shaft, and I think that's where my stumbling block is. We built this nice loop. It's great looking. However, if we were run into a tech inspector that was being picky, I think that this open space would turn him off. So what we need to do is plate the top and the bottom with 1/4 inch plate. That means bending 1/4 inch plate. The width of our loop measures 2.470, which exceeds the NHRA requirement of 2 inches. We have a nice piece of 1/4 inch plate, and we'll mark off 2.510 to give us some room for grinding and saw curve. Scribe a line and take it to the bandsaw to cut it out. And here we go. And we have our piece. Let's round off the sharp edges. Get rid of the saw marks on the edge. And see what we measure before we go any further. It looks like we have 2.490, so we're close enough. We'll do the final grinding once we've got it bent. Before we do any bending, let's make sure this piece is long enough. I set it on the frame on that side, rotate across our loop, and we find that it's slightly too long. So we'll fix that after we've bent the metal. It's very important that we keep this square so that the bend doesn't run off one way or another. And the first part of the bend is the hardest part. So what I do every time I put this in the vise, I take a square and I put it up against the piece of metal to make sure I'm going square. And then just hit it. Each time after I hit it, I bring it over to the hoop and check to make sure my bend is going straight and mark where I got to bend it the next time. So it looks like right about here. And we take it back to the vise and bend it again. Once it starts to bend, you can no longer put the square on top of the vise to see if it's square, but you can set it against the back jaw and that'll tell you whether it's square, and you square it up, tighten it, hit it again. As you can see, the metal is conforming nicely to the hoop, And we just keep going like this until we meet the limitations of the vise. So we'll mark our next bend. At some point you're going to reach the limit of being able to put this in the vise and bending it. So what I do is draw a square line across your piece, set it in the side of the vise on the line, check for square, tighten the vise, and hit it again. Transfer it to the other side of the vise on the line, check for square, and once you're square, hit it again. Now we're constantly checking to make sure our bend conforms to the loop. And we have a little bit of a gap right here. And if we look at the back side, we see that we have a nice tight gap all the way up. So what's happened is the metal is starting to bend this way. So if we put an extra hit here, we'll bring it back. At some point you're probably going to go a little too far with your bend. And in fact, if you look real close, I have a little kink right here. So we need to bring that back. And the way to do that is open up the jaws of your vise a little bit, put it where you want to take the kink out, and hit it. Constantly checking. And now our kink is gone and it fits the loop real nice. Now that we have a couple clamp points, we can put some clamps on this. I'm certainly glad we built this loop strong, because now we can use it as a form to continue our bend. With this much of the bend formed on the loop, we can now put the piece of metal back in our vise fully across and not have to switch from side to side and continue to bend it. We need just a little more arch in our loop. So I'm going to use the press to bend it that last little bit. And let's check our fit. Looks like we got a nice tight fit all the way around. The gap is certainly weldable. And in fact, I've made a second one for the bottom. It's too long. We need to cut it off, but we can do that. I'm glad we started out with a hoop that was slightly too long, because it just fits now. The best way to remove the powder coat from the loop is to take the loop off the vehicle and grind it off. Here we are, removing the last bolt, and the hoops are out. And here we go! And as you can see, it's really tough. With our pieces ground down, we'll head to the sandblaster for final cleanup. Here we are after final cleanup and ready for some assembly. So let's get started. We have the hoop reassembled, clamped, and installed in the car. We're a little proud here, and we're a little proud here in the back, but the rest of it is nice and flush. We can take care of this grinding once we've tacked this in place, and that's the next step. I'm not a great welder, but I'm a pretty good grinder, and what we're going to do is tack it and grind it. For better or worse, that's what we've got. Now it's time to grind. Does it still come off the frame? Yes, it does. Here we go with a bad welder's best friend. So once again, the grinder comes through. So there you have it, all ground down, ready for finished welding. There you go, my attempt to stack some dimes with a MIG welder. I'm certainly sure that it's not going to come apart. I'll probably grind them down flat. Okay, we're ready to put this piece up here, but it's too long. So what we're going to do is mark the hoops as to where they got to go. And we'll make it long because we can always cut some off. Take the hoop off and put our plate over the top of it, and that way we should know where to cut it. With the hoop fitting nicely, what we need to do is draw a line across our marks, because the cut is going to be like this rather than like square to the hoop. So now we have to mark the hoop, and we're going to cut like this, and the same thing on this side. And we'll draw a straight line across the end here, and we're going to cut this long and have to trim it. So I don't know of any other way to cut this other than use a cutoff wheel. So here we go. That's looking pretty good. Let's do a trial fit. And we're close, but it's still too long. I think we'll take a 1/16 inch off. My last cut wasn't too straight. We need to take just a little bit off, so we'll make a corrected grind right here. Check it again. And that looks pretty good. We're going to tack that up. We have it clamped up. Let's tack it in. Here we have both loops finished welded, ground down, and all the spatter cleaned up. They're looking good. Ready for powder coat. Here we have the loop ground and powder coated, and here's a walk around. I had to leave the bolts in because the holes look silly. Next is with the drive shaft. We've put the motor, transmission, and drive shaft back in the vehicle. If I measure from the center line of the universal, this is 6 inches, which is the maximum distance NHRA wants the loop from the universal. We have 1/4 inch plate. This is wider than 2 inches. I believe we've accomplished what we set out to do. I don't think any track inspector is going to have any problems with this loop. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.